Hello and Assalamu alaikum. I am Kashif Kamran and I welcome you to the day 5 and the final day of the Advanced Audit and Assurance Practice to Pass webinar for December 2019 exams being organized by ACCA Pakistan. Now, on this fifth and final day of this AAA webinar, the focus will be on the recent article, which is Data Analytics and the Auditor. And I'll be exploring this article in depth for you to prepare it effectively for exams coming up in December 19. And you will be having some insightful analysis of this article that from from what aspect and how it could be examined in the exams coming up. Then I will be focusing on some knowledge-based questions today from the past paper because the definite objective today is to focus on the knowledge areas. And there have been so many knowledge areas in the past exams which normally students skip and are not prepared effectively for when they go to the exam hall. I'll be doing some very specific knowledge-based questions from the topic fraud, from the topic skepticism, from the topic laws and regulations, from the topic opening balances, and from the topic auditor liability. And yesterday, when we were looking at the question 3, we even had an interaction on a topic known as money laundering. So if you consider money laundering even as a knowledge area, then the list is expanding. Yesterday, we had a word on money laundering because we're looking at the question 3. Today, I'll be focusing on fraud, skepticism, laws and regulations, opening balances, and auditor liability. Beside the knowledge areas and beside the new article, data analytics, I'll be looking at a very important document which is published by the by the AAA examining team, which is basically marking insights by the examining team. This is a wonderful article and a wonderful resource because it really gives students an insight about the examining team mindset and how exactly the examining team marks a script of a student. And when the examining team gives you half a mark or 1.5, what are they looking for in your answer? What they find in your answer when they give you 1.5 mark, or what they find missing in your answer when they give you 0.5 marks. So they've done a good analysis in that article, and I'll be spending some time on that article even, marking insight by the examining team. And then the focus will be on some exam technique articles by the examining team, just to give you an emphasize how important is to read the exam technique articles by the examining team. So quite a diversified agenda for the fifth and final day, looking into the recent article, looking into some knowledge-based questions from the past paper, looking into the marking insights by the examining team, and then more importantly, the exam technique article by the examining team and their importance to exam paper. Okay, let's first start with the knowledge-based questions, and then later in the session, I'll be exploring the recent article data analytics. So let's first spend the first session of this live session on the knowledge-based areas. Now, it is very important that when you look at the knowledge-based areas in the AAA exam, the only thing and the only way you can prepare yourself effectively is by reading the examining team articles. I've been recommending articles consistently over the last 4 days, and that's exactly what I will be doing on this fifth and final day. You can see these articles here, which are basically articles which are exploring knowledge. Auditor responsibility for laws and regulations, professional skepticism, auditor liability, and data analytics. These are all knowledge-based articles, and as a student, you should read them, you should explore them, and you should have a better understanding of these articles on the laws and regulations, on professional skepticism, on auditor liability, and on data analytics. And there have been loads and loads of articles which have been recommended in all the previous 4 days. Then the first two articles obviously are the technique articles, which I will be coming later, and then the marking insight by the examining team, which again is the agenda for day 5, and I'll be exploring that somewhere over the next 3 hours. Now, knowing what is to be done today and knowing the recommended articles you should be reading, and these articles have been given as a resource, and you can download these resources from the handout section of the panel, which must be right in front of your screen. Now, moving further and looking at the knowledge-based areas in the AAA exam and keeping our focus in the very first 1 hour of the session today on the knowledge-based understanding in the AAA exam. Student tends to ignore the full coverage of the syllabus and give less emphasis to knowledge areas of the syllabus, which could be real important exam. This is very, very important. The student tends to ignore the full coverage of the syllabus. How can you expect to be successful in the AAA exams if you have not covered the full syllabus? A lot of time I've seen students that they even have not downloaded the syllabus guide of AAA. They have no idea about the syllabus guide of AAA. They have no idea about how many areas are within the syllabus guide, because unless and until you don't have a syllabus guide, you will have no understanding of have you covered the full syllabus or not. So the student gets to exam hall not focusing on the full syllabus, and then that means they're not focusing on the knowledge areas of the syllabus, because most of the time the student focus on risk, the student focus on procedures, evidence, ethical and professional issues, the student focus on reporting, because these are very frequently asked questions in the AAA exams. But when the student gets into the frequently asked question, the student starts to ignore the knowledge-based areas. So a very important message which needs to be disseminated is that you need to have a full coverage of the syllabus, which is very, very important. Second, examining team do test these areas at regular intervals, the knowledge areas, right? So when you look at these knowledge areas and you look at the bullet number 2, the examining team do test these areas at regular intervals. And you might get them in December 19 exams. You need to go with the proper coverage of the syllabus in December 19 exams, because examining team do test these knowledge areas, which I will be starting shortly at regular intervals, and expects students to have knowledge of these fundamental areas around the audit process for AAA paper. And the examining team expects the student that they should have knowledge of these fundamental areas. Areas include money laundering. We've already covered money laundering yesterday. Laws and regulations. I'll be exploring them today, even though we had a word on laws and regulations somewhere in the day 1 when we were doing the question number 1. There was a question we were doing on the day 1, which was about the Sunshine Hotel. And I think we came across that laws and regulations within that particular syllabus area. Professional skepticism, fraud and the auditor responsibility, opening balances, and auditor liability. Now, you need to do your self-analysis just like 3 weeks before exam paper. How much have you covered the areas which have been in front of your screen? Have you covered money laundering? Have you covered laws and regulations? Have you covered professional skepticism? Have you covered fraud and the auditor responsibility, opening balances, and auditor liabilities? These are not big areas. They can hardly be done in like just one single day, because these are so concise syllabus areas, but they can really have a powerful impact on your 100 marks paper. The examiner do test 6 to 10 marks, at times even 10 to 12 marks on these syllabus areas, but you should be prepared for it. And on a lot of areas, the examiner has written an article. So there is no need even to go into the books. Just an example. Laws and regulations, there is an article. Professional skepticism, there is an article. Auditor liability, there is an article. So out of the 6 knowledge areas in front of your screen, on 3, there is an examining team article. So the examining team is also giving you a support in these areas. So you can prepare laws and regulations from the examiner article. You can prepare professional skepticism from the examiner article. You can prepare auditor liability from the examiner article. Yes, for the other areas like money laundering, you can explore the book. For fraud and the auditor responsibility, you can explore books. For opening balances, you can explore books. But the bottom line is that you should prepare knowledge areas, and rather you should have a full coverage of the syllabus, because if you have a full coverage of the syllabus, that will be real important for your success in the December 19 exams. Okay, now let's start on one by one the journey on the knowledge areas, and let's explore what exactly the examiner has asked in the previous exam settings on these knowledge areas. Okay, if I take on my Word file for the 5th and the final day, and we just do the analysis of the knowledge areas in the AAA exams. Now we need to know that as a student, when you are appearing for exams, you should have a sound knowledge on so many things. Obviously, within the span of these 3 hours and the limitation of 3 hours, it's humanly impossible that I cover each and everything, but at least I can give you a direction on which you can continue on. You should have a sound knowledge on auditor responsibilities in so many areas. You should have a sound knowledge for auditor responsibilities for laws and regulations, or auditor's responsibility for non-compliance with laws and regulations. You should know this. Auditor responsibility for opening balances, auditor responsibility for fraud. So you should have an idea about auditor's responsibility. And what is the auditor responsibility for laws and regulations? What is the auditor responsibility for opening balances? What is the auditor responsibility for fraud? Then you should also be having knowledge of using the work of others. What is the criteria to use the work of others? Criteria to use the work of others. And we covered on the day 1 the using the work of the component auditor. I hope you remember we did a June 18 question where there was a subsidiary which was audited by another auditor, and we need to explain to the examiner whether it is a significant component and how will the auditor be relying on the auditor of the significant component. So you should be knowing using the work of others, which includes using the work of internal auditors, using the work of an expert, and using the work of a component auditor in the case of a group. So you should have sound knowledge, right, on all these areas. Then you should also be having a sound knowledge on money laundering. You should be having sound knowledge on professional skepticism. You should be having sound knowledge on auditor liability. And you should be having a sound knowledge of the role of audit committee in corporate governance. These are all knowledge areas of the syllabus. So when you're preparing yourself for exams, you have a checklist in front of you, and try to do a self-analysis that where are you standing in terms of the sound knowledge. And if you are still weak on this sound knowledge, you still have 3 weeks. And within the 3 weeks, you can do a very good preparation. So will all of you be doing a self-analysis of the list which you have in front of you? And will you see from this list which areas have you already prepared and done, and which areas you still need to do? So if you still need to do some certain areas, then you still have time, right? So but please assure that you're going over this list, auditor responsibilities, you're going over this list using the work of others, money laundering, professional skepticism, auditor liability, and role of audit committee in corporate governance. And I think the component auditor has gone into the day one. We've seen the money laundering yesterday, and even a bit of professional skepticism came into some of the previous days of these webinars. So let's start on the journey. I'm not doing all of these areas, but I'll be doing some of the selected areas from the list. So the remaining areas you will be doing and building your knowledge ahead of the exam paper. Okay, now let's start on with the journey first. Let's first start with opening balances as the first key area, because a lot of time the students ignore opening balances when they go to exam hall, and they have very weak knowledge on opening balances, right? So that let's take that as K1, knowledge one on opening balances. Now we know as an auditor, auditor has a responsibility. Auditor has a responsibility to verify the opening balances. Auditor has a responsibility to verify the opening balances in two situations. The first situation where the auditor has a responsibility to verify the opening balances is when opening balances in two situations. Number one, when the prior year financial statement was audited by another auditor, Now, when the prior year financial statement was audited by another auditor and you are appointed as the new auditor, then there is a responsibility on you to verify the opening balances because the prior year audit was done by another auditor. The second instance where you need to verify the opening balances is when the company was previously exempt from audit. That means this is the very first year the company is having an audit. The company was previously exempt from audit. There was no previous auditor. I hope you can understand the two situations, right? Prior year financial was audited by another auditor and company was previously exempt from audit. So this is the first year the company is having an audit. There is no previous auditor. So as being the auditor, you need to start from zero and you need to verify the opening balances of the company in these two situations. Now, where will you get the knowledge? When the prior year financial statement is audited by another auditor, what should the auditor do? You should get the knowledge from the textbook. Company was previously exempt from the audit. What should the auditor do? What should the auditor do? I just want to give you a pathway. I just want to give you a track. Now, once you realize that you should be having the knowledge about the two situations in which the opening balances needs to be verified, and any one of those situations can be tested in the exam papers, you will be preparing yourself for that. And obviously, you will be going to the textbook, you will be finding a solution about the answer. So you need to find an answer that when the prior year financials are audited by another auditor, what should you do as an auditor? How would you verify the opening balances in this situation? And when the company was previously exempt from audit, what should the auditor be doing in this situation to verify the opening balances? But auditor do have a responsibility to verify the opening balances. Now, if you want to realize a question on opening balances, the question on opening balances is such an old question. and you have no idea when will the examiner re-examine this area. The only instance where the examiner has tested opening balances is way back in June 2011 exams. And I have included that question paper in the resources because you cannot search that old question paper. But opening balances is still part of the syllabus. Can it be re-examined? It can be. Let's see what exactly the examiner asked for in the June 2011 exams. If I just open the practice questions for the session today, many practice questions to be done today, and we go and find the question from the June 11 exams, which is now right in front of your screen. You can see this question shared with all of you. June 2011, question number 3B, opening balances. And when you look at this question, June 2011, and you go to the B part, and you read the requirement of the B part, the B part requirement is testing the opening balances. And that is the only one situation when you see the past paper where opening balances have been specifically asked for. Now see what is the question asking. The question is asking, in relation to opening balances, where the financial statement for the prior period were not audited. See which situation the examiner is asking for. The examiner is asking for in relation to opening balances where the financial statement for the prior period were not audited. And just now we got two situations: when the prior period was audited by another auditor, and when the company was previously exempt. So which situation is the examiner testing in June 11 exams? If I can get your quick answers. Which of the two situations the examiner is testing in the June 11 exam? The second situation, right? When the company was previously exempt from the audit. So this has been examined in the June 2011 exams. So in relation to the opening balances where the financial statement for the prior period were not audited, explain the audit procedures required by ISA 510 initial audit engagements, opening balances, and recommend the specific procedures to be applied on the opening balances of inventory. See, the examiner is asking you two things. Number one, explain the audit procedures required by ISA 510. Then you can see the break, and then the examiner wants to recommend the specific procedures to be applied to Wexford opening balances of inventory. And we have 8 marks. First, the examiner is asking for journal procedures on opening balances, which has been given in ISA 510. And then the examiner is asking for very specific procedures on opening balances of inventory in the given situation. So we have 8 marks. So the question divides into two parts. June 11, question 3B is asking for procedures on opening balances in journal and some very specific opening balances procedure, specific opening balance procedures for inventory. And the examiner is giving us 8 marks for this. We have 8 marks for this. So we should be knowing the procedures on opening balances in journal, and that's where the knowledge can come from the textbook. You need to read the textbook for what are procedures on opening balances when the company has been previously exempt from audit. Procedures on opening balances in journal when the company was previously exempt from audit. When the company was previously exempt from audit. And then very specific procedures on opening balances of inventory. Right, so is everyone clear on the question requirement? So the question is bifurcated into two parts. One part of the question is asking for journal procedures, and one part of the question is asking for specific procedures on opening balances for inventory. Now you need to read the book for this, right? So you need to read the textbook. Let me write over here, note, read the textbook. Read the textbook so that you know the journal procedures, right? Procedures on opening balances in journal, and what specific procedures on opening balances will you be applying on inventory. So will all of you be looking into the book, exploring procedures on opening balances? Have you got the path? Have you got the track? If I can get your answers to this. Has every one of you got the track to prepare the topic opening balances? And will you be going into the textbook exploring the answer for what are procedures on opening balances? And in specific, what procedures do auditor perform on inventory for opening balances? So please prepare this question, go through the answer, have a proper knowledge on opening balances. You cannot just skip opening balances and enter the exam hall. So read the textbook for opening balances, have a proper revision of opening balances. You cannot just take a risk on this topic. First year audits, so many times we do see that in the question number 1, which is the planning question, right? How many times have you seen the examiner says, this is the first year audit? Have you seen that statement of examiner in the question 1, this is the first year audit? If you can give me your answers. Right, you must have seen examiner asking you so many times in the very first question, this is the first year audit, when the question is on planning and risk assessment, right? So what if in the very first question the examiner asks you, because it is the first year audit, what procedures will you be performing on opening balances, and you're blank in the exam hall? So should you be knowing the procedures on opening balances, because the examiner can test it anytime? Since long the examiner has not tested it. So please revise this topic, opening balances. There is no article, so you need to go to the textbook to revise the topic. And this is the June 11 question, which has been shared with you in resources, because this is an old question. So I thought I should share that with you. So at least you have this question in black and white, and you can then drill the answer for 8 marks. Yes, the marking scheme for procedure is 1 mark, right? Wherever the procedures are examined, for every procedure you get 1 mark, irrespective of the topic, right? So just a clarity that over here, when you follow the marking scheme will be 1 mark per procedure. Okay, now let's go to the next one. From opening balances, where I want you to have some realization. Let's do another area, which is on the auditor liability. A lot of time I've seen students that they don't prepare the area on auditor liability, or they don't know that this is a syllabus area, auditor liability. Now, this is not a frequently examinable area, auditor liability, but this is a syllabus area. You cannot just skip this syllabus area and you go to the exam hall. And the good thing with auditor liability is that you are not even reading the book, because there is an examiner article. So if you are preparing this auditor liability area, there is an examiner support, and you have an examiner support in form of the article. And you just need to read the article, which is titled Auditor Liability. So no need to go to the book. Just read the 2 to 3 page article and you will be prepared on this syllabus area, auditor liability. If I can just show you this article, and you go to the technical articles, within a second and so you reach this website, and you go to the technical articles and you browse down, you will see an article which is on auditor liability. See, can you see that in front of your screen? An article here, which is on auditor liability. It is also available as a podcast on iTunes, so it's easy for you. You can download this article, read this. You can also listen to this article. It's available as a podcast. Right? So, will you be reading this article, Auditor Liability? No need to go to the textbooks. Just explore this article. Just read this article, Auditor Liability. Make your notes, make your fundamentals so that you have an idea about what is the mindset of the examiner with regards to the auditor liability. Right? You can download this article, or you can also watch. You can also listen to the article as a podcast. Right? So those of you who don't have the iPhones, obviously you need to download this article and read this article. Okay, so there is an article which is to be read. Okay, now move back and let's see what should we be preparing for. Auditor liability. The basic mindset which you should be having as a student when you're preparing this topic is, when will the auditor be liable? You should know the answer of this. When will the auditor be liable? And we know definitely the auditor is liable when there is a negligence by the auditor. When there is a negligence by the auditor, whether that negligence is unintentional or that negligence is intentional. I hope you all remember the Enron scandal, such a famous scandal. In the Enron scandal, the negligence of Arthur Anderson, it was deliberate. The auditor was involved with the management. So the negligence by the auditor, if the auditor is negligent, whether unintentionally or intentionally, the auditor will be liable, right? So the focal point is the negligence. And obviously the negligence must be given in the case study. When you read the case, the negligence will be in the case. So can the auditor be liable? Yes, the auditor can be liable. When there is a negligence by the auditor. Now, when you look at the past papers in terms of this area on auditor liability, has this been tested in past papers? And the answer is yes, it has been tested. But that's only once. And that once is a very old question. If I can just show you the question for auditor liability. This is the question. June 13, question number 4A. June 13, question number 4A was the question where examiner tested auditor liability. Now see, try to give me an answer. I just shown you a question from June 11 where opening balances was tested for 8 marks. Now I am realizing a question, June 13, question 4A, where auditor liability was tested for 12 marks. And how many times the student ignore such areas and they go to the exam hall? And what if in the December 19 exam, something like June 13 question 4A comes in the exam paper? Or what if in the December 19 exam, something like the June 11 question number 3B comes in December 19 exams? So should we be prepared about these areas? So the basic purpose of this day today is to guide you on these areas so you get a path and you start to prepare yourself on these particular areas. Because if you have no knowledge or you have no idea about these particular areas, you will not be preparing it. So at least one good thing can happen from day 5, that all of you will start to prepare these areas. Is that true? One good thing which can happen after the day 5 ends today is that you will all start to prepare for these areas, right? So at least a message will be delivered that you need to go through these areas, right? And if you go through these areas, then that's good. right? So the past paper, June 13, question 4A for 12 marks, did tested the auditor liability as a topic. Let's see what came in this exam paper. Now, right in front of your screen is the June 13 question 4A, which is about auditor liability. And if you go down and see the requirement, it says, explain the methods that should be considered in determining whether Groom and Company is liable to Spaniel. Groom Company is the audit firm, right? Whether Groom Company is liable to Spaniel Company. Spaniel Company is the client in respect of fraud. So there was a fraud in the company, and the question is asking, explain the matters which should be considered in determining whether Groom and Company is liable to Spaniel in respect of fraud. In respect of fraud. And we know these knowledge questions, whenever they are examined, each matter is worth 2 marks. Right? Let's put this question on the Word file and then do a proper analysis of what is expected out of this requirement. Now, when you look at this requirement, it says, explain the matters which should be considered in determining whether Groom and Company is liable to Spaniel in respect of fraud. And the marks are 12, and I've been guiding you in my previous days as well, particularly yesterday, that whenever you get a knowledge question like liability is a knowledge area, right? So each meta will be worth 2 marks. Each meta explained is equal to 2 marks. So that means if you write 6 methods in the answer, the 6 methods will give you the 12 marks. The 6 methods will give you 12 marks. So now, from where will you be identifying the methods? You will be identifying the methods from the case study. So explain the methods. Whether the audit firm is liable or not. So it may be that the audit firm is not liable, because when the question says whether, I hope you all understand this, when the question says whether, so that means the outcome can be that Groom and Company is liable, or the outcome can be the Groom and Company is not liable. Is that clear with everyone? So when the question says whether, that means the outcome can be both. It could be that Groom and Company is liable, right? And it could be that Groom and Company is not liable in respect of fraud. Now, when you are speaking of the auditor liability for fraud, first of all, you need to be very clear. Auditor responsibility, auditor liability in respect of fraud. Now, that means you need to know 2 things now. You just need not to know the liability article, but you should also be knowing the auditor responsibility for fraud. Is it the responsibility of an auditor to detect fraud? Is it the responsibility of the auditor to prevent fraud? Because you need to have the knowledge of 2 things here, right? I hope you're getting my point. You should be having knowledge of 2 things. The first knowledge you should be having is the knowledge about liability. When is auditor liable? When is auditor liable? And the second thing you should be having knowledge of is the fraud. That what is the auditor responsibility for fraud? Then only you can write a 12 marks answer. Is everyone clear with this structure? That to solve this question, To solve this question, you should have two things in mind. First, when is auditor liable to write a 12 marks answer? And because the liability is arising in respect of fraud, so we should also be knowing what is the auditor responsibility for fraud. Can we put the blame for fraud on the auditor, or we cannot put the blame on the auditor for fraud? So we should have knowledge of two fundamental areas. Now let's go through, read this case. Let's find what's the clue of this case. I'm just reading this case from Spaniel. The audit report on the financial statement of Spaniel, a long-standing audit client for the year ended 31st of December, was issued in April 2013 and was unmodified. So you issue an unmodified report to the client in April 2013. It was your long-standing client, right? In May 2013, Spaniel Audit Committee contacted the audit engagement partner to discuss a fraud that has been discovered. So after the report was issued in May 13, the audit committee contacted the partner about a fraud which was discovered. The company's internal auditor estimate that $4.5 million has been stolen in a payroll fraud, which has been operating since May 2012. Now that means this has been operating, $4.5 million has been stolen in the payroll fraud, which has been operating since May 12. So you issued the report on April 13, right? So that means this payroll fraud was happening even when you were doing the audit. Is that true? Everyone can give me an answer quickly. This payroll fraud was happening when at the time you were doing the audit, because you issued the report in April 13, right? And the audit committee is saying that this payroll fraud has been operating since May 12. So the fraud was happening since May 12. So when you went for the audit, this fraud must have happened, or it must be going on, right? Now let's see, can the auditor be liable for that when he knew that there was a fraud going on? Now let's see, is there any issues here? The audit engagement partner commented that neither test of controls nor substantive procedures were conducted on payroll in the audit of the latest financial statements. As in the previous year audit, there were no deficiencies found in the controls over payroll. The total assets recognized in the financial statements are $80 million. So the audit engagement partner is saying, audit engagement partner commented that neither test of controls nor substantive procedures were conducted on the payroll in the audit of the latest financial years, as they thought that the controls were effective. Do you believe this is the negligence of the auditor? They have not performed test of controls nor the substantive testings. If they have not done test of controls, they should have done substantive, or the vice versa. So they have performed nothing. So the very first meta you can sketch here for your 12 marks answer, you need to write matters and you need to score 12 marks. So your first meta you can think about is the auditor's negligence. Auditor's negligence. They have not performed procedures. They've not performed procedures on payroll. Any one of them. So the first point, auditor negligence. They've not performed procedures on payroll. Second, you also need to mention the fact that the fraud of $4.5 million, which has been the stolen amount, or which has been the loss the company suffered, is it material? See, is the examiner giving you the total assets of the company to judge whether the fraud is material or not? Right? So The fraud value is 4.5 million and the examiner is saying the total assets of the company is $80 million. So is it material? You will get marks for that. So you need to find the materiality. So the first marks is on not performed procedures on payroll. The second marks is on the fraud and the value of fraud. Now the third marks is on the fraud and the responsibility. We need to be very clear here that when we speak of fraud, we should be assured that the management itself has a responsibility for fraud, and the management is primarily responsible for fraud prevention and detection. Do you believe this is correct? Is primarily responsible for fraud, whether it is a fraud prevention or it is a fraud detection. You cannot just put the blame on the auditor, even though the auditor was negligent here, that he didn't perform any procedures on payroll. But the management needs to take on their responsibility as well, that it is the management responsibility to have controls in place, to have effective controls in place. And through the effective control, the management needs to ensure that they have a responsibility for fraud prevention and detection. So can we put the 100% blame on the auditor of the fraud? Can we put 100% blame on the auditor for the fraud? No. Second, auditor responsibility. Is auditor responsible for fraud? And the standard says the auditor should carefully plan and perform the audit. Plan and perform the audit with an attitude of professional skepticism. At least, irrespective whether the auditor can detect a fraud or not. But do you believe the auditor should perform the audit with an attitude of professional skepticism? And do you believe that the auditor had been skeptical? Look at this first point we got. Auditor has not performed any procedures on payroll. So does it contradict that the auditor should have an attitude of professional skepticism? So I think the groom had missed the skepticism in the audit because they didn't perform procedures on payroll, even though there is a responsibility of management. Right? Then also you will be speaking of the auditor's limitation. Auditor's limitation versus fraud. Auditor's limitation versus fraud. Firstly, auditor is only looking at material things, material aspects of audit. Auditor don't looks into immaterial things. But do you believe payroll is a very major expense of any company? We are not looking at the value of fraud, right? We're not looking at the value of fraud. Do you believe payroll is a very major operating expense? Payroll is a very major operating aspect of the audit. So payroll is a major expense or is a material expense. So auditor only looks at material things, and I think in this situation the auditor had a big negligence, because even the payroll was material, he overlooked it. Even though payroll is material by expense, right? It is such a significant operating expense of the company, right? It's not material by nature, it's material by amount. So payroll is a material expense. Second, auditor has a limitation. Sampling basis. Do auditor test 100% population? Do auditor test 100% population? No, the auditor works on sample basis. And then there is a limitation, which is the time constraint. Do auditor works for a whole year? No, he has a stipulated time. So when you're making up a 12 marks answer, you cannot just directly allegate the auditor. We know auditor has been negligent in this case, no doubt. But you cannot just directly put all the allegation on the auditor. As a auditor, you should know auditing. Do you need to know what there are some limitations of the audit when you're thinking about the auditor liability? Will you be thinking about auditor's limitation when you're speaking of the liability in exam? Will you be speaking of the responsibilities when you're speaking of the liability? For everything, auditor alone is not responsible, right? There is a part of management. We need to understand that the management runs the company, the management runs the business, and they are primarily responsible for things. So can we just write a 12 marks answer where we just allegate the auditor? Is that true? In a whole 12 marks answer, we just allegate the auditor? No. We need to be constructive in our answer, right? So should we keep our tone constructive? True or false? Should we keep our tone constructive in the answer? Yes, we will make an open answer here, right? So see, I've given you so many bullets. Every bullet and every sub bullet is giving you 2 marks, and you need to make a 12 marks answer. So every bullet and every sub bullet is giving you 2 marks, and I think you have more than 12 marks on screen. You just need to bring them in paragraph form. So, and the better thing is first read the article on liability. If you first read the article on liability and then you do this exam paper, you will have a much more better answer to this situation. So is everyone sound on the need to read auditor liability? Is that an area where you can be taking a risk and going to December 19 exam paper? So I've given you a clue. Please continue on with the clue because many things needs to be done today. And again, I also have a time constraint, right? As to the auditor. The auditor have a time limitation. I also do have a time limitation, right? So within that time constraint, I also need to do many things with you just to make you realize how important things are to be done for December 19. Okay, so please continue on with this question from auditor liability. We've done that. We've touched upon opening balances at the start of the session. Okay, now let's do another very important area where you need to be very good at is an area known as professional skepticism. And that is a very, very regular feature of exams. This is an area of a syllabus where the potential exists, K3, professional skepticism. This is such a potential syllabus area. And this has been a regular feature of exams, right? This have come in more recent exams even. And it's been more regular. That examiner do ask you questions on professional skepticism. Now, the first thing, from where will you take the knowledge? There is an article, right, on professional skepticism. And you go to the website again. And on this website, you will see the article here, professional skepticism. You need to read this article, right? This is a must to read article, professional skepticism. And please remember, professional skepticism is an important syllabus area, more important than auditor liability, more important than opening balances. So you cannot just undervalue professional skepticism. You need to prioritize professional skepticism because professional skepticism is a more regular tested area in the AAA exams. Right, so please read this article, professional skepticism. It has already been included in your resources for the day 5, and it was also informed earlier over my last 4 days. Okay, now, so there is an article with the same title, Professional Skepticism. So at least no need to go into the textbooks. You can just read this article and be good at, right? So you can read the mindset of the examiner. Read the examiner mindset rather than you're reading the textbook here. And you could be so good. Take your notes, develop your notes. Now, once you've read the article, and you want to do exam papers on professional skepticism, and you want to know how this topic is tested, how you get this topic in exam. For that, I have chosen a question which is an insightful question, because that will really give you the dimension of this topic when you're preparing yourself for exam paper on professional skepticism. Okay, if I take on my past papers again, and you see this question in front of your screen, a very comprehensive question on professional skepticism and will open your mindset. June 15, question number 3, which is on professional skepticism. And this is a very good question to illustrate this topic. June 2015, question 3 is on professional skepticism. Now, the very first thing this question is asking you is, explain the meaning of the term professional skepticism. Now, that is where the article becomes very important. Not just the meaning of the term professional skepticism, comma, and discuss the importance in planning and performing the audit. The examiner wants you to discuss the importance of professional skepticism in planning and performing the audit. And the marks are 5. Now we know this is a knowledge question, so everything will be worth 2 marks. The meaning, and then the examiner wants you to discuss the importance of professional skepticism in planning and performing the audit. So the first requirement from this exam paper is to explain the meaning of the term professional skepticism and discuss the importance of skepticism in planning the audit, in planning and performing the audit, right? And the marks are 5. Now, how will you take these 5 marks? 2 marks for the definition, 2 marks for defining, and you are left with the remaining 3 marks then, right? So 3 is an odd number, so 2 marks per importance. So you will take 2 marks per importance. So that means if you can write 2 importance to wrap up the answer, because 1 importance will give you 2, the second will give you 2, so you're taking 4, right? So 2 importance and 1 definition will wrap up the answer. Now the answer of this lies in the article. Explain the meaning of the term professional skepticism, and I hope most of you know the meaning, right? That what is the literal meaning of the word professional skepticism. The meaning means that the auditor should be having a questioning mind. An auditor should be alert. Auditors should be alert throughout the process of the audit, That's just the mindset, right, of the auditor. Then you need to get to the importance of professional skepticism in planning and performing the audit. The importance is that the auditor can identify the risky areas. If he is skeptical, the auditor can identify unusual things during audit, suspicious things, even suspicious behaviors of the management, So if you are skeptical, you can even identify some suspicious behaviors of management when you're going for audit. You might even find some suspicious things happening in the client, or some unusual things happening in the client, which can make you skeptical about a fraud, right? So please do read the article, explore the article for importance of professional skepticism, explore the article for meaning. Meaning means you have to give the definition, right? Now comes an important part of this article, of this question. You go down this question, this was the part A. Now you see a case, There is a case, and followed by a case, there is a requirement which is on the case study. See this requirement, B. It says, discuss how professional skepticism should be applied to the statement made by Silvio. How would you apply professional skepticism to the statement made by Silvio? Now that means that's a case specific situation. There must be a statement made by Silvio in the case study, and we need to discuss how professional skepticism should be applied to a statement made by Silvio. Now that means case specific. The second requirement, this requirement is saying discuss how professional skepticism could be applied to a statement made by Silvio, could be applied to the statement made by Silvio. And the marks are 6. So now that means a statement made by Silvio is a case specific answer, and we need to discuss how professional skepticism could be applied. How would we be applying professional skepticism to a statement made by Silvio? Now for every how, 1.5 marks per how into 4, and you get your 6 marks. So we need to read the statement made by Silvio, right? And by reading the statement made by Silvio, we need to think how professional skepticism could be applied. And for every applied, for every how, we will be scoring 1.5 marks. So let's go through the statement, and let's make a sketch answer for 6 marks. I hope these questions and practices and these shorter topics today is opening your mindset for exams. So over the last 1 hour, have you realized something? Over the last 1 hour, we have been in opening balances, we have been in auditor liability, we had been in fraud, and now we are in professional skepticism. Right. The knowledge areas are 2 marks, right? But when the examiner asks for application of something like a case study, the case specific things becomes either 1 or 1.5 marks. It's a case specific thing, right? Statement made by Silvio. So when we are doing a case specific situation in exam, either it is 1 mark or 1.5 mark. When the examiner asks you something like definitions and advantages and disadvantages or importance of something, then that is worth basically 2 marks. Okay, now let's find the sketch answer. Let's read the statement made by Silvio. Okay, here is the statement made by Silvio. You can see the open inverted comma and the close inverted comma very carefully. So I'm just reading the relevant part of the case. Silvio has prepared a file of documentation to support the result of the impairment review. So during the year, the company has performed an impairment review, and Silvio has prepared a documentation to support the results of impairment review, including notes on the assumptions used, his calculation, and conclusion. So he has a proper file in which he has the results of impairment and the assumptions he took for impairment, so on and so forth. When he gave you this file, Silvio made the following comments. I don't think you should need any evidence other than that contained in my file. So see what he's telling to the auditor. I think Silvio is the finance director of the company, and he's saying, I don't think you need any evidence other than that contained in my file. Should we be skeptical why Silvio is trying to stop me from doing other work? Should I be skeptical here? Why is Silvio trying to stop me? Why is Silvio saying, I don't think you should need any evidence other than that contained in my file? Do you believe auditor has a responsibility of accessing every information and explanation? So can anyone stop the auditor? Can anyone limit the auditor? So should we be skeptical about the very first statement? I don't think you need any evidence other than that contained in my file. So number one, Silvio seems to be limiting. Silvio seems to be limiting the scope of the audit, or is trying to conceal something from the auditor. Because he's saying, I think my file is enough, right? My file is enough. So it seems as if he's limiting our scope, or as if he's trying to conceal something from the auditor. So should the auditor be skeptical about the statement? Should auditor be skeptical about the statement? Definitely yes, because this is a very strange statement. This is a very unusual statement coming from Silvio, and it seems that as if the Silvio is trying to limit the scope of the auditor, right? Number two, the assumptions used are straightforward, so you shouldn't need to look into them in details. He's saying that the assumptions I took are very straightforward, so you should not look into them in detail. That's another strange statement, right? Do you believe assumptions are straightforward? Don't we believe assumptions are risky? Assumptions are subjective. So he's saying the assumptions are very straightforward and you should not look into them in detail. So does it seems he's trying to stop us? And does it seems that uh, there is something which he's trying to conceal from us? Can you understand the concealing tone of Silvio here? He's trying to conceal something from us. So the next point, assumptions are straightforward and should not look into them in detail means Silvio is trying to hide something from the auditor and does not want the auditor to perform detailed procedures on impairment. Is that true what I'm writing? Means Silvio is trying to hide something from the auditor and does not want the auditor to perform detailed procedures on impairment. So is there something fishy? Is there something Silvio is trying to conceal by not giving auditor the permission to go deep inside impairment? Right? I hope you can sense a Silvio um, statement, and you can sense the need to be skeptical behind the Silvio statements here. Right? So that's how you're going down with the answer, right? Okay, let's do one more example and you continue this answer yourself later. We've already reached 2 of the 4 points. The next one. The assumptions are consistent with how we conducted impairment review in the previous year, and your firm has always agreed with the assumptions used. Is it true that if I have agreed to the assumptions the last time, I will be agreeing to them this time as well? Don't you believe assumptions change from year to year? Right? So he thinks that the assumptions you never challenge the assumptions, he's saying. So he thinks that this time they will be fine as well. So the assumptions are consistent with how we conducted impairment reviews in the previous year, and your firm has always agreed with assumptions used. So he's saying that your firm always agreed to assumptions used, um, not necessarily not necessarily that if the audit firm agreed to the assumptions last time, not necessarily that if the audit firm agreed to the assumptions last year, will be doing the same this year. Each year, the assumptions needs to be carefully evaluated because they have a high risk of material misstatement, because they have a high risk of material misstatement. So twice in the first 2 points, we got that as if Silvio is trying to conceal something. Even though the statements of Silvio was very different, but both the first two statements almost produced the same answer, but that was case specific answer. Look at my third point. Your firm always agreed to the assumptions used. So I thought not necessarily that if the firm agreed to the assumptions last year, will be doing the same this year. Do you agree with that? Each year assumptions needs to be carefully evaluated because they have a high risk of material misstatement. Right? So I think Silvio again and again is trying to conceal something. Again and again, he's trying to stop us. Again and again, he's trying to put some limitations on our scope, right? I hope you're getting the track of the answer, right? So the statements coming from Silvio are very strange. Yes, no doubt, no doubt. These statements is putting a doubt on the Silvio integrity, as if he's trying to conceal something. So yes, no doubt about that, that these statements are bringing a doubt on the Silvio integrity, and we need to be skeptical why Silvio is giving such statements to the auditor, right? So will you be continuing with the remaining answer? You need to read the statements given by Silvio, and with every statement you need to think, why is Silvio giving such a statement? Is he trying to conceal something? And at the end of the day, you need to understand assumptions are risky. Impairment is such a subjective area, right? The recoverable amount you determine in impairment has so much assumptions. When you look at the breakdown of recoverable amount, in the recoverable amount you have the value in use, which is so subjective. Then in the recoverable amount you have the fair value less the cost to sell. So do you believe the recoverable amount as a component is a very subjective component? And do auditor and is there a need for auditor to be skeptical in subjective areas? Is that true? Is there a need for auditor to be skeptical in subjective areas? So impairment is a subjective area, right? And the Silvio statement is making it more complex. And the Silvio statement is making it more challenging for us. Right, so that's an area of professional skepticism from the past paper. Please remember, professional skepticism is a more regular feature of AAA exams. You should have a sound knowledge of the examiner article. You should spend time on this question to prepare yourself for professional skepticism. Reading the article will be very, very important because that will give you a deep inside understanding about how professional skepticism really comes in the exam paper. I hope that's clear with all of you, right? So far, how has been the session? Have you got some insights? Has it been an eye opener for you in terms of your preparation for December 19 exams? And do you believe the next 3 weeks can be carefully planned by all of you in terms of your preparation? 3 weeks is a good time, right? 3 weeks is a good time. You can still do wonders in 3 weeks. And if you stick to a proper study plan as from today onwards, you can still do wonderful. Okay, now I'll need to explore another area, knowledge area, which is known as fraud, and that would be the last one before I go to the very first break. So let's explore the last knowledge area, which is the fraud area, and let's see, is there any support of the examiner on fraud, and what exactly the examiner expects from us on fraud. So let's open this as the fourth more important areas of knowledge where the student should be good at. Okay, let's start on with K4, and this is the knowledge 4, and this time the knowledge is on fraud. Now, what examiner expects from us on fraud? Okay, now let's start on with the journey. Fraud. Is there any article? Is there any support of the examiner? Support of examiner. Let's search for that. I take you back to the website and we'll explore, is there any support of the examiner, right? We start reading it from the very top. The first 5 articles are techniques, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So leave them out. Data analytics we are doing today in the next session. Audit in a specialized industry, evaluation of misstatements, responding to NOCLA, corporate governance and its impact on audit practices, auditing disclosures, laws and regulations, professional skepticism, auditor liability, completing the audit, group audit, specific aspects, analytical procedures, audit risk, massaging the figures. This is the article. This is the article which is such an important article when it comes to exploring your knowledge for AAA for fraud. See, can you see the title of this article, massaging the figures, manipulating the figures, and see what the examiner is saying, earning management, what it is, when it becomes fraud, and the implication for audit. So if you want to be good on fraud, massaging the figures, you need to read this article and see the next one, ISA 240, audit and fraud. So 2 articles supporting fraud. Have you ever read these 2 articles on fraud? Have you ever prepared that much for fraud? Massaging the figures. An ISA 240 redrafted, auditor and fraud. You need to read these 2 articles, right? So is there support? Yes, there is support. So articles, support of examiner, yes. And there are 2 articles. Number 1, massaging the figures. And number 2, ISA 240, auditor and fraud. So no need to go to the books, right? Just read these 2 articles, make your notes, and then you can solve the past papers. Now you just need to understand one thing very importantly here, because I need to do a question with you. Massaging the figures is equal to manipulating the figures. Manipulating the figures. True? Manipulating the figure means creative accounting. Creative accounting. Creative accounting means earning management. Or earning management means a fraudulent financial reporting. See, I put all the synonyms for you. Massaging the figures is equal to manipulating the figures. Is that true? Creative accounting, earning management, and a fraudulent financial reporting. So is everyone clear with these terms I used? These are all synonyms. These are all synonyms of one another. And you believe, yes, window dressing is a very old jargon. The new jargons are creative accounting. The new jargons are earning management. The new jargons are fraudulent financial reporting. So now tell me one thing. Massaging the figures and you look at the financial statements. There are some areas in the financial statement which have a high risk of massaging. The first and the foremost area which have a high risk of massaging is revenue. And the ISA 240 says this is a fraud risk factor by default. So ISA 240 says revenue is by default a fraud risk factor. So the highest risk of fraud in the financial statement is in the revenue. Management can overstate the revenue. They can be management can overstate the revenue. There could be cutoff issues with revenue, cutoff issues, timing of recognition. How many times we have seen past papers where the revenue has been recognized too early? The timing of recognition is a big issue. the wrong application of the accounting standard, the wrong application of the accounting standards, the IFRS 15, the revenue recognition. We know that revenue should be recognized when the performance obligation has been met. But if the company recognizes the revenue prior to the performance obligation has been met, then the revenue is overstated. Right? So revenue is the high risk of massaging. The second area which has a high risk of massaging is estimates. Estimates is such an important area when it comes to high risk of massaging, and so many estimates, right? So many estimates. Estimates like fair values, estimates like impairment, estimates like provisions. How many times we see exam papers in AAA which has the word estimate? Management has estimated. Useful life. The useful life is also estimated. So in an exam paper, whenever you see a revenue, you need to be alert. Whenever you see an estimate, you need to be alert, because these areas do have a risk of massaging the figures as high as possible. Right? Is that clear with everyone? Read the article, massaging the figures, right? And the only conclusion the auditor have, auditor responsibility. What can an auditor do for these fraudulent areas? The first thing the auditor can do is be skeptical. Is that true? Auditor should be skeptical. Uh, plan and perform the audit properly. Focus on risky areas. Focus on risky areas. So these are some things the auditor can do, right, to be closer to window dressing, to be closer to creative accounting, to be closer to earning management. So this is just an idea of the article you need to read. I just try to make a summary of the article, which will help me in solving the exam paper even, and which will eventually help you in reading the article as well. Right? So is everyone having some sort of a mindset on fraud now? And you need to read the examiner articles and supports given. 2 articles you need to download and read. Now let's see what is the question asking us in this exam setting. June 16, question 3. That's the question we're taking for fraud. June 16, question 3. Okay, let's see what this question is asking us. The first requirement. I'm reading the case. It says, according to ISA 240, the auditor responsibility relating to fraud in the audit of financial statement, open inverted commas. Read this paragraph, such an important paragraph here. As per ISA 240, when identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement due to fraud, the auditor shall, based on a presumption that there are risk of fraud in revenue recognition. So there is a presumption, right, that there is a risk of fraud in revenue recognition. Evaluate which type of revenue transactions or assertions give rise to such risk. So when we go to the audit, we go with the presumption. We go with the presumption that there is a risk of fraud in revenue recognition. And which type of revenue has a more risk of fraud? Which type of revenue transactions have more risk of fraud? Or which types of assertions have more risk of fraud in revenue? Now comes the question. Discuss why the auditor should presume that there is a risk of fraud in revenue recognition. Discuss why the auditor should presume there is a risk of fraud in revenue recognition. Discuss why the auditor should presume there is a risk of fraud in revenue recognition. Discuss why the auditor should presume there is a risk of fraud in revenue recognition. Why? Why do you think there is a presumption that there is a fraud in revenue recognition? What should be the first why? Why the auditor should presume there is a risk of fraud in revenue recognition? Because auditor should presume there is a risk of fraud in revenue recognition because if revenue is overstated, it boosts the company's profitability and is an easiest way to manipulate the financial statement and is the easiest way to manipulate the financial statements. So if the management manipulates the revenue, do you think there will be a trickle down effect on the profitability, on the gross profit? Is that true? So if revenue is overstated, it boosts the company's profitability and is the easiest way to manipulate. And that's why we presume there is a risk of fraud in revenue recognition. Number two, management bonuses. Management bonuses are linked with growth in revenue. A lot of time the management gets bonuses on the growth in revenue. This is a critical success factor, that one of the criteria to give you a better bonus is how much has been the growth in revenue. Every company is worried about the growth in revenue. Every company is concerned about the market share. Every company is concerned about how much has been the growth in revenue over the competitor. So do you believe this is an incentive? Because management bonuses are linked with growth in revenue. So that incentive is basically creates the risk of fraud in revenue recognition. Then thirdly, volume of transactions makes revenue very complex, and something which is complex, automatically the risk of fraud increases. Do you believe how much is the volume of transaction in revenue over a year? Imagine companies like Unilever, imagine companies like Procter and Gamble, imagine companies like Apple, Microsoft, IBM, imagine companies like Kraft, imagine companies like General Motors. Imagine the volume of transactions in sales. Imagine Walmart. Imagine Walmart. Imagine Amazon. Think about the revenue. Think about the revenue transaction volume of Amazon. Do you believe this is complex? Do you believe this is complex? Volume of transaction. And when there is a high volume, the management can easily manipulate things. Management can easily conceal things in high volume. If there is a single transaction in a year, it's very difficult to hide something. But if there are millions and millions of transactions in a year, you can easily hide things within millions and millions of transactions. Are you getting my perspective here, everyone? So volume of transactions in sales also makes it a complex area, and that increases the risk of fraud and revenue recognition. So that is what the examiner is asking you, why the auditor presume. So when the auditor goes for the audit, why he presumed there is a risk of fraud and revenue recognition? Because of the volume, because of the incentive, because it is an easiest way to boost the profitability of the company. That's the first requirement, right? And we know this is a knowledge requirement, so everything is worth 2 marks. 2 marks per valid point. Per valid point. And then you look at the next requirement of the same question. It says, discuss why the auditor should presume that there is a risk of fraud in revenue recognition and why ISA 240 requires auditors specific auditor responses in relation to risk identified. Why ISA 240? Why ISA 240 requires specific auditor responses in relation to risk identified? Why ISA 240 requires specific auditor responses in relation to risk identified. Is the question asking us to write procedures, or is the question asking us why ISA 240 requires specific responses in relation to risk? So is the question focusing on why specific responses, or is the question asking us tell the procedures for how to mitigate the risk of fraud? The question is not asking for procedures, right? The question is asking for why ISA 240 requires specific responses in relation to risk identified. The number one, why? Because to mitigate risk of fraud to an acceptable level during the course of the audit. So why ISA 240 requires specific auditor responses in relation to risk? So that the risk of fraud can be mitigated by the auditor during the course of the audit. Is everyone understandable with the first why? To mitigate the risk of fraud to an acceptable level. That is the first reason. That is the first reason why ISA 240 requires specific responses. Right? You have in total how many marks? You have in total 7 marks, right? So 7 marks, and everything you do is giving you 2 marks. Now it's up to you. This and this together is giving us 7 marks, right? So if you write 2 points above and you write 3 points below, you're getting your 7 marks. You need to take total of 7 marks. 7 marks means divided by 2, you need to write 4 points. Now 4 points means if you write 2 points for why auditor should presume, and you write 2 points for why ISA 240 requires specific responses, you're taking your 7 marks. 2 marks per valid point, right? And how many marks we have in total? 7. In total 7 for both requirements. Right? So whatever you want to do, you need to get to 7, right? You write more for one requirement and less for the other, or you write less for one and more for other. So why ISA 240 requires specific responses? First, to mitigate the risk of fraud to an acceptable level. And secondly, why ISA 240 requires specific responses? So that there is a standardization. There is a standardization of audit responses, and there is a standardization of audit responses, and the element of judgment is reduced. So the ISA 240 contains the specific responses. So the ISA 240 wants that there should be a standardization of the auditor responses, and every auditor follows the responses given in ISA 240. So do you believe when every auditor will follow the same responses given in ISA 240, there will be a standardization of responses, and that will eliminate the need of judgment, eliminate the and the element of judgment is reduced. And the element of judgment is reduced. So please understand the question once and final. The question was asking us that when we go to the audit, why do the auditor presume there is a risk of fraud and revenue recognition? Every reason you give will give you 2 marks. And then the second part of the question was asking that why ISA 240 requires specific responses in relation to the risk identified. So the ISA 240 requires specific responses, first to mitigate the risk, and second that there is a need of a standardization when it comes to fraud. So every audit firm follows the same set of responses. So there is a standardization in how the audit firm responds to the risk of fraud, and thus the judgmental elements becomes eliminated or reduced. No, this is just a sketch answer, right? That's the reason I'm writing in bullets, right? If I start to write the para forms, I will hardly complete one question in my stipulated time of the webinar. So I want to maximize the answers. So I'm just giving you a bulleted answer so that you know exactly the points. Once you know the points, you will explain them. Is that clear with everyone from the June 16 question number 3? Right, so we've gone through most of the knowledge-based areas assigned for the day 5, the fifth and the final day. And obviously, it's time for the break in the session. Post-break, when I'll resume back in 15 minutes, I'll be looking forward to the article on data analytics. And I'll just be having a quick word on knowledge areas post-break as well before I jump into the article on data analytics. But the basic objective of this first part of the session today was to give you a realization of preparing the knowledge area. So have you all got this realization that you will be preparing the knowledge areas and you will be drilling the knowledge areas and you will be reading the articles? Because my basic objective will be achieved if you will read the articles, and my basic objective will be achieved if you start to realize that knowledge areas cannot be eliminated, knowledge areas cannot be skipped. So I hope all of you will go through these knowledge areas which have been realized in the webinar, and you will cover the full syllabus, right? So just keep dropping your feedback for the first session today before we go to break and come back with the second and the last part of the session. Please drop your feedback for overall uh, session so far and your overall feedback of the session so far in terms of your knowledge you gain from the session. Right now, we're going for break, and post break, the session will resume at 8 p.m. Pakistan Standard Time, and at 8 p.m. the very first focus after 8 p.m. is to look into the data analytics, which is a very important topic for December 19 exams. Right, so please drop your feedback in the chat box, and once the session gets over today, you will see the feedback form in front of your screen. So please do drop the feedback in the feedback form as well. We're going off break, and in 15 minutes from now, I'll resume back with the last part of this day 5 webinar. 8 p.m. Pakistan Standard Time, the session will resume back. Welcome back after the break. And now we have the last 1 hour approximately for the fifth and the final day of this AAA webinar for December 2019 exams. I am Kashif Kamran, and these webinars are being organized by ACCA Pakistan. Now, I'm just looking at one final question from the knowledge-based area before I shift my focus towards data analytics. And that final question is on an area which is known as laws and regulations. Because we have covered money laundering yesterday, professional skepticism has gone through today, fraud, opening balances, auditor liability, even though laws and regulations was covered, I hope you remember that, was covered in the question number 1 when we were doing the question from December 17, question number 1, and that was the day 2 of the webinar. On the day 2 of the webinar, when I was doing the question 1 from the December 17 exams, we touched upon laws and regulation, and I even recommended the article on NOCLER, non-compliance with laws and regulation. I hope you remember that. If any one of you has taken the live day 2 session, I recommended NOCLER as an article, non-compliance with laws and regulation, because we were doing a question then on day 2, which had a requirement which pertains with laws and regulations. Now, just to show you the requirement we are left with, this question right in front of your screen. December 13 question 3b is about laws and regulation, and only one part of this question is about laws and regulations, and the question is right here. It says, in relation to the management decision not to report the accident to the National Coal Mining Authority. Now, when you read the case, you will get to know from this case that there was a breach of a law, and the management was taking a decision that they should not report that to the National Coal Mining Authority. Now, National Coal Mining Authority was the regulator, and there was a breach of a law, and they need to inform that to the National Coal Mining Authority. But the management has taken a decision that they should not be informing it to the National Coal Mining Authority. Discuss burden and company responsibility, audit firm responsibility. What is the audit firm responsibility? Discuss burden and company responsibility and recommend the actions which should be taken by the firm. Now, these are responsibilities in relevance to a non-compliance with laws and regulation, because when you read the question above, you will get to know that there is a non-compliance in the case. Management is not reporting it to the authority. The question asks you, what is the auditor responsibility for the non-compliance with laws and regulation, and recommend actions to be taken. I have recommended this article on my day 2, which I am re-recommending again now, which is the article on laws and regulations. Here, when you read this article on laws and regulation right in front of your screen, this article will give you a deep insight understanding about the management and the auditor responsibility for laws and regulations. See this line written here. It is important that candidates preparing for P7 have an understanding of how laws and regulation affects an audit, not only in terms of the work the auditor is required to do so, but also appreciates the responsibility of both management and the auditor where laws and regulations are concerned. So examiner is telling you a clue from this article that it is important that candidates preparing for P7 have an understanding of how laws and regulations affects the audit, not only in terms of the auditor responsibility, but also appreciating the management responsibility for laws and regulations and the auditor responsibility for laws and regulations. So when you read this article, you will get the knowledge about the auditor responsibility, and that knowledge will then help you with the answer of this exam paper. Burden and company responsibility. So burden and company responsibilities and the actions is coming from the article And just a reminder again, um, that this topic was also covered in the day 2 of the webinar. So please also listen to day 2 of the webinar. If you have not attended the live session, see the recording of day 2, because I covered a question from December 17 exam paper, question number 1, in which there was an application of laws and regulation, and I did solve that requirement, and I did mention this article. So you can take guidance from that point as well. Yes, the marking scheme, because it's a knowledge area. For responsibility, the marking scheme will be 2. For responsibility, the marking scheme will be 2. But actions are just like procedures, right? So actions have a marking scheme of 1 in the AAA paper. So if you're writing an actions, then actions will have a marking scheme of 1 mark per action. So when you write the responsibility of the auditor, then you will gain 2 marks. But when you're writing an action, you will gain 1 mark per action. Right, so let's wind up this discussion now. This was about auditor responsibility for laws and regulations. And for this, there is an article to read. This becomes the knowledge area 5K5. Article to read, yes. And the article is laws and regulations, which you shouldn't read as an article. And when you read this article, you will have an understanding about the mindset you should be having with regards to what your examiner expects from you about laws and regulations in exam paper. And in terms of the exam questions, today on the day 5, I'm doing an exam question today, day 5, which is December 13, question number 3B. This one. And then I did a question on the day 2, which was December 17, question number 1. So please assure that you do these 2 questions in terms of laws and regulations after you read the article on laws and regulations and you made proper notes on laws and regulations. Once you make the notes, then come to the exam paper and solve it, because these are questions where the knowledge is tested, right? Now, please ensure one thing very importantly, that wherever throughout the last 5 days, I have recommended you the articles, the very first thing you should do is that you will first download the article, number 1. You will read the article, number 2, and you will make your notes. Now, once that is done, then you take on a question from the past paper which pertains to that article and try to solve it, right? So this should be your methodology of how you should go with articles, and then connect articles with exam papers, right? I hope everyone is sound and clear on that. So many articles on day 1, then day 2, then day 3, then day 4, and now day 5. Um, Loads of articles, but I hope you understand that these articles contributes to your success. And you still have 3 weeks, which is good enough time, and you can wrap up these articles. But if you wrap up these articles and you go to the exam hall, at least you are in a better position of securing success in the December 19 exams. So please make a habit of reading an article at least on a daily basis, or 2 articles on a daily basis, making notes, and then try to attempt the small questions of 6 marks, 8 marks, 10 marks, which have appeared on these articles, right? Is that sound and clear with all of you? So that's completing one of my specific agenda today on day 5. which was to look at the knowledge-based areas, and again within the time constraint and the time limitations, because each day is worth 3 hours, and within 3 hours, obviously, it's humanly impossible to do each and every aspect. But the focal point again is to give you a track and a path, and I hope you all start to continue on that path. Is that okay with all of you? If I can get your quick responses. Okay, so the clues have been given to all of you, right? I hope each and every one of you got the clues. Each and every one of you have got the outlines. Now the outlines have been made, right? Now you need to fill the outline with the colors. And when you fill the outline with the colors, you need to do a lot of efforts. So I hope um, you start to make a timetable from today and start to make a strategy, a very proper strategy, which will be till the 1st of December. And obviously on 2nd of December, you have your exam paper for the December 19 exam setting. Okay, now focusing on data analytics, the new article which is pending since the last exam sitting in September. Though the article was published in August, it was high likely it will come in September exams, but it didn't. So will it come in December exams? Yes, the chances are quite significantly higher. So can we take a risk of going to exam hall without preparing this article? Not at all. And you see this article right here. And please, just one clarification. There is an article about laws and regulation, which I just recommended you, right? Which tells you the basic responsibilities for laws and regulations. But even I recommended an article on day 2, which is right here. You can see that in front of your screen now. Responding to non-compliance with laws and regulation. If there is a non-compliance, how will the auditor respond to non-compliance? So please also do read this article. That article is about the positivity, laws and regulation, and the auditor responsibility. And this article is about non-compliance with laws and regulation and what actions will the auditor take, what steps will the auditor take. So please also go through this article. It was recommended on the day 2. But just want to give you a clarification that you will be reading 2 articles on laws and regulations. Let me write down that on the Word file. One article is laws and regulations, and the second article is auditor responsibility for non-compliance with laws and regulations. So 2 articles needs to be read here. Okay, this article was already recommended and already shared with you as the resources for day 1 and day 2. So 2 articles to read for laws and regulations, and then start practicing your questions from laws and regulations. Okay, now that's bringing us to this article. Data analytics and the auditor, right in front of your screen. Such an important article because it was skipped in September 19 exams. So will the examiner bring it into December 19 exam? That's a big question, and the chances are significantly higher, right? So let's explore this article. I clicked this article. This has been shared with you as a resource for day 5. You can see that in the handout section. I'm going through from the website. Data analytics and the auditor. Let's read it and let's understand this. Please keep a focal and your focus very strong as we drill through this article in the next 20 to 25 minutes, and let's try to realize the main points, main aspects of this article, what you should be knowing and preparing for exam paper. Okay, let's do this article now. Data analytics and the auditor. The recent article. You can expect it anywhere in the exam paper. It can be in question 3, the most open question. We normally see recent articles coming in question 3, but you can expect this question coming anywhere, wherever the examiner wants to fit in, but the chances is significantly higher. So let's open this topic and let's discuss and wind up this topic. I'm reading and I'll stop where I need an emphasize. Keep your focus on the screen. This article provides some insights into the matter which needs to be considered by auditor when using data analytics. The advanced audit and assurance syllabus includes the following learning outcomes, right? So the advanced audit and assurance paper includes the following learning outcomes. Let's see what are the learning outcomes you should have from this syllabus area. Again, just mentioning one thing finally, this article was published in August 2019. August 2019, right? It was not examined in September exams, so it will have a carry forward effect to December exams, right? So what is the learning outcome? Number one, assess and describe how IT can be used to assist auditor and recommend the use of computer assisted audit techniques and data analytics where appropriate. So how IT can help auditor in the conduct of the audit and how the auditor can use data analytics during the course of the audit and how the computer assisted audit techniques can help the auditor. You must have studied these computer assisted audit techniques in uh, the AA paper, audit and assurance paper, but assess and describe how IT can be used to assist the auditor and recommend the use of CAT and data analytics. And the second, discuss the current development, discuss the current development in emerging technologies, including big data and the use of data analytics and the potential impact on the conduct of the audit quality. So your examiner is expecting two things from you from for December 19 exams or later, that you should first assess and describe how IT can be used to assist auditor, how IT can be used to assist auditor in the audit, including the CAT techniques, right? And secondly, your examiner is expecting discuss the current developments. You should be capable of discussing the current developments in relation to the emerging technologies. Emerging technologies like the big data. We know big data is already part of many papers in many papers in ACCA, including the strategic business leader exams, including big data and the use of data analytics. So you should know the emerging technologies like big data and the use of the data analytics and how they impact the audit quality. And we know the examiner tests knowledge, right? So what if the examiner brings a 6 marks question in December 19 exams and the question asks you, uh, discuss the current developments in emerging technology or discuss the current developments in uh, big data or in data analytics. So you should be open for that. Or what if the examiner gives you a procedures in the exam paper and you need to use the procedures involving the computer assisted audit techniques? So two things expected. In addition, candidates are expected to have a broad understanding of what is meant by the term data analytics and how it may be used in the audit to improve audit. So examiner is also expecting that the student should have a broad understanding of what is meant by data analytics. An examiner has covered all this in the article. So do we believe there are three expectations now of the examiner on the very first page of the article? If we look at these three expectations, and I just put the expectations of the examiner here. Number one expectation of the examiner, that the students should know how can IT assist. How can IT assist auditor in audit, including use of computer assisted audit techniques. Number two, discuss current developments. Discuss current developments with regards to emerging technologies, regard to emerging technologies, with regards to emerging technologies like big data and data analytics, and their impact on audit quality, and their impact on audit and its quality. And the last thing the examiner expects from you is that you should know the meaning of the term data analytics. So should you be reading this article around these three expectations and try to get all the three expectations done and deliver by reading this article? So should everyone know what is the objective now of reading this article and what your examiner expects from you and what you should be achieving at the end of the day when you're reading this article? A lot of time we start to read an article, but we don't know the objective. Every time, the very intro paragraph of the article sets the objective. And if you know the objective, that's how the exam question will come in, right? So is everyone clear on the objective? And from the objective, you can expect an exam question. Examiner can convert any of these objectives to an exam question, right? So objective, now let's find the answers to objectives. Let's find the answers to the objectives above. Let's read the paras from the article. Okay, I've shared this within my technical articles today as a resource. So if I just scroll down and reach this article, which has been shared with you on data analytics for a proper analysis right here. Okay, what is data analytics? So your examiner was expecting that as a student, you should know the definition. We know that whenever a new article is tested in exam paper, it is also tested for the definition. So what if the examiner asks you in December 19 exam paper, explain the term data analytics? So what is meant by data analytics? And the definition has been given right here. See this. The IAASB defines data analytics for audit as the science and art of discovering and analyzing patterns, deviations, and inconsistencies, and extracting other useful information in the data underlying or related to the subject matter of an audit through analysis, modeling, and visualization for the purpose of planning and performing the audit. So you need to learn this definition and reproduce this definition in your own words. It is the science and art of discovering data analytics. Data analytics. If you want to have an easy version, rather than you learn this definition which has been put in red on the page on this page number, the first is meaning. Meaning of the term data analytics. So the meaning of the term data analytics is break things down. Analytics. Analytics means to analyze. Analytic means to analyze. What are we analyzing? We are analyzing the financial data of the client. So it's a way to analyze the financial data of the client, and that analysis will help auditor in identifying what? Number one, unusual patterns in the data, unusual behaviors in the data, fluctuations in the data, some correlations in the data. So the auditor will be studying the data. We know this is normally done manually through analytical procedures, but data analytics is beyond analytical procedures. Auditor do study the unusual patterns and the unusual fluctuations even through a procedure known as analytical procedure. I hope everyone is sound on that. And data analytics is the maximization of analytical procedure. Large amount of data, exactly. So if you are going to companies again like Amazon, you're going to companies like IBM, you're going to companies like Procter and Gamble, you're going to companies like Unilever, you're going to companies like General Motors, Pepsi, Coke. Imagine the data, and you have like a month and two to do the audit. So you need to use your computers, you need to use your softwares when you're going to the audit of these large companies. And you need to assure that you study the data, you analyze the data, and that data will really help you with unusual patterns, with unusual behaviors and fluctuations and correlations, right? We know all the big four firms now have the data analytics software, whether it is Deloitte, whether it is PricewaterhouseCooper, whether it is E&Y, whether it is KPMG. They all have the data analytics software because that's the future, right? That's the future. That's the opportunity. So you need to invest in opportunities. So all the audit firms have already invested in this opportunity and have started using data analytics. It has already become a reality, right? It has already become a reality that you're using specialized computer softwares. You're using specialized computer softwares which are capable of doing data analytics, which are capable of analyzing the data. So analytics. So you should know a definition of analytics. You should know what you get from data analytics, right? So the data analytics, the analysis can help auditor in identifying the risky areas, plan the audit more efficiently. You can plan the audit more efficiently. You can identify the risky areas. You can plan the audit more efficiently because you're using computers into that process. So automatically, when you introduce machines, in a process, automatically the process becomes more refined, the process becomes more efficient, and the process become more paced up. So there will be a lot of time saving. You can do the work quicker, and you can just focus on the areas where you need to focus on. So data analytics meaning. So you need to know the meaning from the article. Please read this meaning and rephrase this meaning in your own word. And you have chunks and chunks of paragraphs to read through. Please do read through this article. You need to read every paragraph of this article, right? Examples of the use of data analytics to perform audit procedures. Now, the examiner was saying that the auditor should use computers. Auditor should use IT in the audit. Now, see, if you use IT in the audit, if you use a data analytics software in the audit, it can also help you to perform procedures like NRV testing, comparing comparing the comparing the last time an inventory item was purchased with the last time it was sold and at what price. So we know inventory valuation for a larger company is so difficult because in inventory valuation, we also need to determine the slow moving inventory. Now, to determine a slow moving inventory, last time an inventory item was purchased and last time it was sold and at what price, right? So will NRV testing becomes more easier with these use of IT? When NRV testing becomes more appropriate, can we do the NRV testing on a larger sample? If we have the data analytics with us, So can we analyze the selling prices of the inventory? Can we analyze when was the last time the inventory was purchased? When was the last time the inventory was sold? Will this all become easier with the data analytics? So we can really analyze the data of the company and bigger companies where the volume of transaction is very significant. We can also do the analysis of revenue trends by products and regions. We can do the analysis of the revenue by region, revenue by customer, revenue by product. It will become so easier, right, for the auditor to know that each product revenue, each region revenue, and this becomes so easier. Matching purchase orders to invoices and payments through your computer software, through the computer software which is equipped with data analytics. This computer software can match the order with the relevant purchase invoice. The computer order can match the relevant purchase order with the relevant payment. So see, so much helpful, right? This data analytics and a software capable of data analytics. Segregation of duties, testing by identifying combinations of users involved in processing transactions. You can also use the segregation of duties. We know that uh, in a computer system, there is a log. Every time a person log in to the system, the log is maintained, and your data analytics can go and check the log of the system to see how many people are involved in a single process, how many people log into a single process. Eh, you can check the segregation of duties. So segregation of duties can be checked by identifying the combinations of users by a combination of users involved in processing of transactions from the metadata attached to the transactions. So many benefits, right? So what was the examiner expecting us? Examiner was expecting us that we should know the meaning of the term data analytics. We should also know how IT can assist auditor in the audit. So now can you believe that IT can really assist auditor in IT? Can the auditor use the computer assisted audit techniques? Can that really help auditor in increasing the sample size, do more in less time? So how can IT assist auditor in the audit? Two, how can IT assist auditor in audit? Number one, more work can be done in less time. More volume of transactions can be checked. More volume of transactions can be checked. The sample size can increase. The sample size can increase for auditor. And more importantly, you can perform better substantive procedures. You can perform better substantive procedures through audit software. You can perform better substantive procedures through audit software. Like what? Like NRV testings, like revenue analysis. These are all examples the examiner was given. So do you expect the examiner can test the same examples in exam paper? NRV testing, revenue analysis, matching the purchase order with relevant invoice, matching purchase order with relevant invoice and payment. You need to know the examiner examples, right? Payment and invoices. Evaluating the segregation of duties, evaluating the segregation of duties. So your the audit software needs to become more specialized through by embedding data analytics in it, embedding data analytics in your audit software. Now we know audit software has been a reality for audit firms over years. Every audit firm use audit softwares which are capable of using the computer assisted audit techniques. But now the audit softwares have changed. You have incorporated data analytics in your software. Now your audit softwares are capable of um, analyzing the data of the client. Your audit softwares are capable of studying the data of the client and finding unusual patterns and unusual behaviors, which can be really helpful. So should we deploy data analytics at the very start of the audit when we are doing planning and risk assessment? Can data analytics helps us at the stage of planning and risk assessment? So you should know the benefits, right, of data analytics. So examples where data analytics can be used. What are benefits of data analytics? You need to read through this. What if the examiner asks you in December 19 exam paper, explain the benefits of data analytics? See, examiner has covered so many benefits. You need to read through these benefits. Every heading given in this article is examinable. You cannot ignore headings. Benefits of data analytics. The heading before that was procedures. The headings before that was how data analytics can be used by the firm. The headings before that is what are the uses of data analytics. So please ensure that you read every heading and you make your notes, because you don't know which heading comes in December 19 exams. Challenges of data analytics. What are some of the challenges the audit firms can face using data analytics? That's another heading. And that ends the article. So where is the focal part of the article? Where is the article trying to focus on? The article is trying to focus on, number one, the definition, number two, the uses, number three, the procedures, number fourth, the benefits, number five, the challenges. So try to make notes of the definition, try to make notes of the uses of data analytics, try to make notes of some specific procedures. What if the examiner asks you, recommend some specific procedures using data analytics? So can you recommend some of the specific procedures using data analytics? You can write all this in exam paper, right? Which is the one given by the examiner. So what if the question asks you, recommend some of the specific procedures auditor, recommend some of the specific procedures auditor can make use of through while auditor can make use of involving data analytics. Right. And what if the question comes in the exam paper asking you, explain benefits of using data analytics? Or what if the question asks in the exam paper, explain the challenges of using data analytics by the audit firm? Definition, explain the meaning of the term. Explain the meaning of the term. Uses, give some uses. So try to convert each heading into a question and ask the question to yourself and see, are you capable of giving the answer to that question? So there are 5 fundamental headings in the article. Will you be making notes of each of the 5 fundamental headings? Is everyone clear on that structure? Read through the article, go through the article. For every heading, make notes. For every heading, raise a question and try to respond to that question. So any of these questions can come in December 19 exams, right? You have to read the article in perfection. even the examples. You never know, the examiner gives you the same example in exam paper. What if the question comes on inventory in December 19 and the examiner asks you, recommend some of the procedures on inventory using data analytics, right? So what if the case comes on inventory? What if the case comes on revenue? So can we expect a case in December 19 exam paper? For example, a case comes on inventory valuation. An examiner puts a case on inventory valuation and then connects the case with data analytics. Or what if the examiner gives you a case on revenue and then connects the case with data analytics? Or what if the examiner gives you a case on purchases and then connects that with data analytics? So you cannot take the examples of the examiner lightly. Yes, if the knowledge is tested, in the data analytics, then we know everything is worth 2 marks. And if the examiner asks you the procedures, then procedures is worth 1 mark. What can the examiner ask you? Either the examiner can ask you the knowledge is worth 2 marks, right? Or the examiner can ask you procedures are worth 1 mark, right? So this article was published in August 19. It is an important article because since it was published, it has not been examined. So August 19, this article was published. September 19, it was not examined. October, November, December, you're going for exam paper. So this is the most recent article and this has not yet been examined. Had it been examined in September, would not have been important for December. But because it was not examined in September, obviously this is becoming important for December exams, right? And you can prepare yourself from Google as well. For example, you write on Google, uh, audit procedures using data analytics, audit procedures on inventory using data analytics, and you can get some very good answers on Google. So you can prepare yourself, right? You still have time. And with you can also use technology, right? You yourself can use technology to prepare yourself for the triple exams. Do you believe the importance of technology, importance of Google and Googling out something, typing something on the Google and getting the right answers, right? So I hope this article, the mindset of the article has been developed for every one of you, and you will be reading through this article over the time span you have before exam paper. So must to read article, right? So I've just done a one-page analysis of this article. This page will be shared with you, obviously on the WhatsApp group. So you can take a printout of this page and use this page as a study material for the article on data analytics. Okay, now just into the last few minutes of this fifth and final day of this webinar, because after this fifth and final day, you will have your own time, and after that you will enter the exam hall. So some of the things are very important which needs to be informed to you. I've shared a handout in my resources for your own interest. This is the article, this is the handout which says read the mind of the marker. I would prefer that you go through this handout and try to read what your marker is trying to tell you. Your marker is trying to tell you when the marker gives you 0 marks, when the marker gives you 0.5 marks, when the marker gives you 1 mark. And the exam marker has taken some of the past papers as example, and then the marker tried to write the answers of the past paper. And in those answers, he mentioned that if you write the answer this way, you will get 0.5 marks. If you write the answer this way, you will get 1 mark. If you write the answer this way, you will get 1.5 marks. So try to read through this marker analysis, because eventually your paper has to be marked by the marker. So if you read the mind of the marker, that's very important. So try to read through the mind of the marker. Now, the only one problem in this read the mind of the marker is that this article was published when the format of the paper used to have 5 questions. Now the format of the paper has 3 questions, right? And the marker has used a question on ethical and professional issues when the format of the paper used to have 5 questions, right? So the marking scheme used by the marker for ethical and professional issue is 1.5 mark. Don't get confused with that. The ethical and professional issue marking scheme for your exams is 1 mark. Right? The examiner has used 1.5 mark because this article was written at a time when the marking scheme used to be 1.5 marks. Is that clear with every one of you? So the examiner and the marker has used a marking scheme of 1.5 mark in this article. Don't get confused. The marking scheme you have to use in exam hall for December 19 for ethical and professional issues is 1 mark per ethical issue, per professional issue. Because you read this article and the next question you will put on the WhatsApp group will be that you told us in the session that the marking scheme is 1, but the marker is telling us the marking scheme is 1.5. This is an old article, right? Which was published at a time when the marking scheme was 1.5, but indeed it's a good article. You should read this article, read the mind of the AAA marker, because that's a valuable resource which is published by ACCA, and you should be exploring this valuable resource. Right, so that's one recommendation to all of you. Now that is at least ending my agenda items for the 5th and final day, but the last 15 minutes I have now are very crucial and very valuable, because these last 15 minutes can be really helpful to all of you. And you need to concentrate very effectively in these last 15 minutes as I try to wrap up the December 19 webinar, and I try to bring a conclusion and a summary over the last 5 days, and that will really give you the right track, the right path on which you should be going over the next 21 days. Now just try to understand something very carefully in these last crucial minutes. Today is the 8th of November, right? And on the 2nd of December, you have your exams, right? So today is the 8th November 2019, right? And the day and your exam day is on 2nd December 2019. Now that means you have approximately 3 weeks. Now from today to the 2nd of December, how are you going down utilizing your time? Let's make a strategy for December 19 AAA exams when we are left with 3 weeks to prepare. Now, you have studied or you have not studied, and you have entered for exams for December 19. You have paid your fees. Now you want to give your exams in December 19, right? You still have 3 weeks. Right, I'm taking 3 weeks on the lesser side, right? Obviously, if you calculate the exact days will become 24 or 25. But I'm just taking 3 weeks as a psychological impact here, that we have 3 weeks to prepare. Now, 3 weeks is a good enough time, right? If you make a proper strategy and try to deliver things up. Now, the very first thing you need to do here is you need to prioritize. That's the most important thing. If you start with weak areas or small areas first, that's not good, because you need to prioritize things, that what should you be doing first? What should be your priorities in the next 3 weeks? Now, please understand one thing, that your priorities have to be risk assessment, your priorities have to be procedures and evidence, your priorities have to be ethical and professional issues, including the quality control issues. Your priorities have to be completion and reporting stage. Your priorities have to be other assignments, and primarily the audit of performance information, or primarily the review of prospective financial information as more important one. Because forensic came the last time, so you cannot just prioritize forensic. You If you have time, you should do the 100% syllabus, right? But if you are going with priorities, then review of prospective financial information and audit of performance information sounds more important priorities for December 19 exams. So first, make a priority list, that what you should be prioritizing first, because this is an area which is a more regular feature of exams. Getting a question on risk is more regular. Getting a question on procedures is more regular. Evidence is more regular. Ethical and professional issues is more regular. A reporting question is more regular. Other assignments are more regular. Now, it's up to you. Some students might complete this in a week, some might complete it in 10 days, depends upon your own preparation so far, so forth. But once you complete these prioritized areas, you then need to look into the knowledge areas as quickly as possible. You need to focus on areas like money laundering. You need to focus on areas like in the prioritized area, we're missing something. Data analytics should be in part of your prioritized areas. Data analytics. Okay, then you come to the knowledge areas and you go with money laundering. You go with laws and regulations. You go with professional skepticism. You go with using the work of others. Using the work of others. You go with auditor liability. You go with auditor and fraud. So you try to brush over the knowledge areas: money laundering, laws and regulations, professional skepticism, using the work of others, auditor liability, auditor and fraud, opening balances, corporate governance, opening balances, audit committee, and corporate governance. That is another article right on the website. So first make a prioritized list and try to wrap up the prioritized list as early as possible. And after that, try to drill on the knowledge areas. But please ensure, try to maximize the syllabus in 21 days or 22 days. You cannot go with less syllabus in exam hall. Try to go with maximized syllabus in 3 weeks. So in 3 weeks, how much can you maximize? First, go over the prioritized areas, which is the major impact on the 100 marks paper. Then go with the knowledge areas, revise the knowledge areas. Now, over the webinar, I have been recommending that I have done risk procedures, ethical issues in my previous webinars. I've recommended those webinars. And I've covered the knowledge areas into this webinar. I've covered many other areas in this webinar, which was not touched upon in the previous webinar. So this webinar and my previous webinar, September 19, and my previous webinar, June 19, at least is very important. So you need to make a timetable to watch the June 19 webinar. You need to make a timetable of watching the September 19 webinar. And if you have participated live in this webinar, then that's wonderful. So try to make your priorities for watching the webinars, reading the articles, prioritizing the areas, because that's the way you can prepare yourself for exams. Also remember, read of articles is very important. That's three things, right? Prioritize the areas, knowledge, and read the articles. Now, when you are practicing, please assure that you practice more recent papers first. More recent papers first. That's 2016, 17, 18, and 19. Do them first. Yes, if you complete with them, then do papers from 2015, 2014, and 2015. Not going beyond that. But your first priority should be 16, 17, 18, 19. And if you're done with that, then go with 14 and 15. That's maximum. Practicing. Now, you should also drill at home, but drill at home using time management. Follow the rule of the time management, the rule which has been taught to you, the rule of 1.95 minutes per mark, and the rule of 1/4 time is planning and 3/4 time is writing. At least do this at home. That's the only way you will learn this for exam hall. You cannot just directly apply this on the day of exam. But if you're prepared for it, you have done it at home, then automatically this becomes doable in the exam hall. But if you expect I'll do it for the first time in the exam hall, that's very difficult, right? So please assure one thing, that you practice, you drill at home. That drilling at home is very important. The more you drill at home, the better. You practice recent paper, that's very important. And try to get a holistic view of the AAA. Try to get a holistic view in the next 3 weeks. Now, each and every one of you know the weak areas and the strong areas. Each and every one of you know which area is your stronger and which area is your weaker. So you need to make a strategy for yourself, and you need to do your self analysis, right? So you need to set a target, and the target is success. So if you set that target, then you have to study day in and day out to achieve that. 3 weeks, cut down your social activities. 3 weeks, cut down every time where you think I waste my time. So 3 weeks, prioritize studies, right? And if you prioritize studies in the next 3 weeks, you can do wonders in exam. So crucial times, and crucial times for preparing yourself for the triple exams. Right now, over this webinar, a lot of things have been discussed. A lot of things could not be because of the time limitations, and you need to understand the objectives of these webinars run by ACCA Pakistan is just to give you a glance, is just to give you an overview. Obviously, this is a free of cost resource which ACCA Pakistan is providing you, and this is the free of cost platform where the students are not incurring a single penny, and against that you're getting a benefit. I hope if you do the cost benefit analysis of these webinars, that's tremendous, because you're not incurring a single cost, and against that look at the benefit you got. And still obviously there are so many questions from student that how should we do this and how should we do that. You need to understand the objective of this webinar, right? So I hope these webinars have been productive for you. I hope if you do the cost benefit analysis of these webinars, they must have really given you some real good benefits of preparing yourself for December 19 exams, right? This was not a paid course, right? This was not a paid course. This was a free of cost webinar, right? So everyone needs to utilize the time. Everyone knows how you spend your 24 hours. Some goes to offices, some goes to jobs, some are full-time students. Everyone needs to study, and you need to find time, right? So make a strategy and go down with it. Just one last thing which I'm missing out, which could be very, very important for all of you, is that in an exam paper you can start with any question you like to be done first, right? It's not necessarily that you start with question number one first. If you think you want to start with question 2 and 3 first, start with, then come back with question one. So you can do them in any order that's recommended by the examiner. And examiner says that even the students who do section B first and section A after have improved their passing rates. So that's a golden inverted comma statement, right? The students who do section B first and A after have better passing rates. So you need to choose yourself. Should you do section A first or should you do section B first? So you need to manage your time, right, accordingly. Every question has a time barrier. So whether you do section B first or section A after, there is a time barrier. And you need to fit every question within multiply by 1.95 times. So that's one of the strategy you can adopt in your December 19 exams of doing the section B first and A after. And it's totally up to you. If you want to do A first and B after, that's totally up to you. You need to make your own strategies. Just please drop the feedback of the overall webinar as quickly as possible as we enter into the last 2 to 3 minutes of this last day. So if you can just drop your feedback over the through the chat box and over of the whole webinar and of the whole exercise which was spread over the last 5 days. And if you can drop the same on the WhatsApp group, and you can drop the same once the webinar ends, you will see a screen of the feedback appearing in front of you once the webinar ends. So please ensure that you fill in the feedback very carefully. At the end of the webinar, right? I wish all of you a very best of luck. As a tutor, within the 15 hours constraint, I tried doing the maximum and I tried giving you the maximum benefit from these 15 hours. And I wish you all success in upcoming exams. And I hope you do the best, right? Uh, in the upcoming exams in December. So it was very nice interacting with all of you, very nice seeing you into the live sessions and participating so effectively within these webinars, right? So it's been wonderful. It's been wonderful. And I hope a lot of you must be taking these webinars for the very first time. So it must have been a great source of learning for all of you from these webinars, right? Just the final announcement. Uh, this was the AAA webinar aimed at the December 2019 exam. I was your tutor, Kashif Kamran, and these webinars are being organized by ACCA Pakistan for broader benefits of the students. It's time to sign off. It's time to say you goodbye. Have a nice day and study effectively for your exams coming up in December. Best of luck and um, keep keep interacting over the WhatsApp group. Goodbye and Allah Hafiz.